Hello and welcome to the webinar, Optimizing Solar Asset Management. I'm Luke Brett from Reuters Events and I'll be moderating this discussion. As you may already know, I'm organising the PV Operations Europe Conference March 5th to 6th in Munich. This is one of our several pieces of work that we're doing on optimizing the operational phase of the solar life cycle. Now, we've had 800 of you signed up today, so thanks very much for the great response and thank you in advance to our panelists for their time. So audience, do let us know if we're coming through loud and clear. Could you submit on the chat function just to say that you can hear us or hear me speaking, and also start asking your questions on optimizing solar O&M. Okay. Fantastic. Right. So everyone's saying the audio is great, which is very good. Good start. Okay, excellent. So just a brief and a bit of housekeeping before we begin. The webinar will be approximately an hour and is being recorded, so we send you the full recordings and presentations within a week or so. So you have the facility to ask questions through me as the moderator, so you make sure you have access to your computer. The purpose of today's session is to really take a closer look at the barriers when operating and maintaining a solar park, and to discuss which technologies are being used that are cutting operational costs. Joining me today to address some of the key issues, we have Stefan Müller, who's the co-founder of Enerpark, Robin Herschel, Technical Director of Opton, and Mike Carter, who is an associate of Everose. All the organizations involved today will be speaking in Munich for PV Operations Europe. So if you'd like to meet them in person, then do join us by registering through our website. Just search PV Operations Europe and follow the links. Also, if at any point today you want to ask the panelists a question, simply enter this into a text box and we'll try to get this in during the Q&A. So without further ado, let's begin. Stefan, could you give us a bit of an introduction about yourself and your role in managing and operating solar parks?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction and the webinar now, and I think it will be a good starting point for the PV Operations Europe 2020 in Munich, so we're looking forward to it. My name is Stefan Müller. I'm one of the owner and the founders of Enerpark. Enerpark is in the whole value chain of photovoltaic, so from development to EPC, O&M, but also up to energy trading. We have at the moment nearly 2 gigawatt under own assets and under operations, so this belongs to us. I would like to share my lessons learned and my experience now here in this webinar, so feel free to ask the questions.
Fantastic, fantastic. And Robin, do also introduce yourself.
Yes, happy to do so. Robin Herschel from the Danish company Opton. So Opton is a sort of asset manager, IPP. So we are owning and operating through our fund structures some like 800 megawatt across Europe. Currently also working overseas in countries like Canada, where we're about to build a 170 megawatt plant, or Australia, where we have a joint venture for some larger ground mount plants. And my task at Opton is to build up and organize sort of a small technical team in order to get us a bit closer to our assets. So over the past 10 years, Opton has been consisting mainly of the business and legal departments, and now we're also getting the technical aspect of the asset management a bit closer to us as the owners. And previously, as probably most of you know, I have been founding and building up Encam Energy Performance, a technical service provider. So I've spent like the last 13 years of my life in technical aspects of photovoltaics, from module manufacturing down to large PV projects.
Perfect, perfect. And Mike, also, do you say a little bit about yourself and what you've done in managing and operating solar parks?
Oh, thanks, Luke. So my name is Mike Carter. I'm an associate at Everose, which is a technical advisory service. We are fully focused on renewables with solar, onshore and offshore wind and storage. And our major customers are our large investors and lenders to well, for solar for solar parks and other renewables. From a personal basis, I actually joined the wind industry originally 2005. Then I moved to solar in January 2011. And I've worked as an EPC and O&M contractor before I moved into consultancy in 2016. At Everose, I do works on tendering, owners engineering, and advisory services, and got a slight, small set of asset management on an independent basis as well. And recently, I did a placement with one of the large O&M providers in the UK. So I'm mostly UK focused on this. But yeah, looking forward to the webinar.
Perfect. Well, let's just dive straight in. I suppose one question, I know the webinar obviously is on optimizing solar O&M and asset management, but I suppose the question is, what is the key challenges then? Because what is there to optimize? So I suppose, Stefan, with your experience on, both operating and building these parks and owning them, what is the biggest challenge at the minute for solar O&M and asset management?
Now, I think at the moment everything is getting more digital, but digital doesn't mean so much that it's also efficient. So I think our biggest challenge is really the amount of data which our O&M guys are getting. So I think everyone is talking about drones, and we are probably talking also today also about it. But this is for me the biggest topic which I see. So on one hand, I try to improve the efficiency of my team, and on the other hand, they're getting more data. So we need something in between who is a bit more intelligent, who can give advices, so that the teams can manage more sites at the same time.
So, Robin, what do you see then? Is data also the biggest challenge, or is there any other huge challenge that is taking up most of your time?
Well, I would put it even a bit more general. The largest challenge that we experience in the management of our portfolio is the sheer variety of issues. On one hand, on the technical side, the many different types and of plants, different sizes, different technologies. But also, I mean, previously I always thought techniques is the most biggest thing in PV, but the many stakeholders that you're dealing with, different jurisdictions, different regulations, different boundary conditions, and the individual entities are comparatively small, so it's very difficult to keep the whole thing efficient and at the end of the day profitable.
Okay, so Mike, with your experience then in operating parks, so what are you seeing as the key challenge?
I guess the sort of thing I see the most difficult to deal with is badly built plants. So there are some poorly built assets constructed in a rush, particularly, I mean, I'm sure this is international, but particularly in the UK, and they can consume an enormous amount of time in any portfolio manager's week, and then maintaining your focus on other plants becomes quite difficult. I think also picking up maybe on what Stefan and Robin said, I think it's also important to try and maintain a profitable supply chain. So actually maintaining the whole supply chain in a way that makes money is going to be important going forward.
Okay, so let's just dive into a couple of the questions that I wanted to ask. We've got to taste the challenges there. Stefan, what would you say would be your kind of top 3 initiatives in efficiency improvements for O&M and asset management to counter some of the challenges we've just mentioned?
I think everything is always related to a level of ownership. So if you can manage that the operational team, including the maintenance guys in the field, feel responsible for their own power plant, then I think this is the biggest top initiative of everything. So as probably a few of you know, we are a fully integrated business unit. That means we try to do everything by ourselves, including our maintenance teams and own energy trading teams. So I think this is for us the main driver and also the highest initiative. On the other hand, we try to work consequently on increasing the technical availability to 100% of the plants. And this works only if you have a high level of ownership. So if you do an inspection in the field with probably the coolest tools, you need people who open their eyes and ears and are not running through their checkboxes. So they really have to feel responsible, and if they see that the cable tie is loose or the screws beginning to rust or something, then they should immediately give us the right information. Yeah, and I think the third biggest initiative is really be always open for ideas and concepts who can increase the yield of existing plants. Yeah, I think this is also, I think, the main topic of this webinar and also the conference in Munich. But I think there are a lot of cool and interesting ideas, from the magic spray to, let's say, storage night and day, and you name it. So there are a lot of initiatives which you can do, but you have to be open. Yeah? You have to try it out. You have to see what is possible. Especially when what Robin mentions, you have a number of issues which are coming up now because the sites are all different. And if you are then open for increasing the awareness, then I think you are on the right track.
Okay, I mean that ties into what I was going to ask Mike about actually, which is which I imagine takes a lot of being open, and it's on how significant an improvement can good O&M make to the yield of a portfolio.
So I have to say, Luke, it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string question. It's a difficult one to answer. However, I mean, it can be very significant. So I think Res are on record on a portfolio saying 10 to 12% increase in performance. That seems an awful lot to me. But I can imagine there are quite a lot of sites which are, which are performing poorly, where you can really get a significant improvement. At Everose, we do quite a lot of operational monitoring for lenders, and on one specific portfolio, which originally had O&M being provided by the EPC contractor and a local O&M partner, had some significant issues with string cables and inverters. We saw some major improvements with the change of O&M provider and investment by the owner. I think this ties in with what Stefan had to say, that ownership is not just the O&M guys on the ground, it's also the asset owners themselves, the asset managers themselves, all having an ownership piece. And on that portfolio, we've seen first of all, the trend from decreasing PR to increasing PR, which is really, really good to see, and a PR improvement of between 4 and 6%, which of course projected over many years is a vast increase.
Okay, so I mean, this is obviously what you're saying is mainly UK based, but Robin, you're well, I mean, it probably ties in internationally. I was going to ask Robin also, how do you see the best distribution of asset management resources between, central and local?
Well, the company that I'm working for at the moment comes from a position that thought everything can be done centrally. So there was a quite significant team built up here in Denmark that sort of coordinated the asset management, both commercially as well as technically, all over Europe at that time. And we have learned over the last years or months that might not be the best solution. So to put the answer that we have found in sort of one sentence, I would say the resources should be based where the stakeholders are based. So the local stakeholders require the local resources. What do I mean by that? An Italian asset base needs to be coordinated and managed by Italians. The GSE, for example, or other Italian authorities need to be dealt with by an Italian team. On the other hand, an international lender that finances the project might be then dealt with central resources that sort of consolidate all the information from the various countries. Also, Danish private investors, and that's the majority of our investors at Opton, does want to talk to some people in his or her language in Denmark, and therefore asks for counterparties that are centrally in our case. And yeah, the PV plant itself, of course, is also you could also call it a stakeholder. So that's why it is also important to have then the right operation and maintenance resources on the individual countries, and that's also one of the learnings that we had, that not necessarily an O&M provider that is very good in one country is equally good in another country. So there might, of course, be a number of international providers around, but sometimes it also makes sense to really have some rather local or regional resources and counterparties that might do the job better than international providers, especially when it comes to things like groundkeeping, module cleaning, or site security, for example.
Okay. So, I mean, you tied in then on the scope of technical improvements of existing assets, and we actually did just have a question in actually on bifacial technology. It's a question I want to ask Stefan about. So, are you doing any technical improvements of existing assets? And someone's actually asked Kevin Robinson. There's a big shift towards bifacial technology. How will this affect O&M? Specifically cleaning and performance claims. Would you be able to, fill us in, Stefan, with your technical improvements and what you're doing with bifacial modules?
Yeah, let me first also go into whatever the technical improvements which we have implemented and which we want to do now. So I think a few of us, I think it was also on our last conference with you, that we shared our information about the recoating of existing modules. This was an interesting lessons learned with DSM, which we did on a few of our plans, and now we're executing this on larger plans. And we see really a very interesting increasing of the yield. Yeah? So I don't call it's the magic spray or something, but you really can see it on plants which have a high feed-in tariff, for example, and the modules are a little bit older, so 8-9 years. Then it makes sense to review if it's helpful to put an additional coating, AR coating on the modules. So for us, super interesting activity where you really increase your cash flow without, let's say, little effort. Yeah? On the other hand, we are also looking to simplify, for example, the inspection in the field. Yeah? So we work together with a company called TapTool. And this is a simple app which our inspectors are using when they're doing the site visits. And the system is connected to the database. So they can really make a picture, can fill out a simple format, upload it, and increase the interaction between the teams. I think this is what Robin also mentioned. I think if it's central or local, it's not so relevant. I think it is much more important that the O, operations, the M, the maintenance, and the asset management teams are working together. So you have to ensure that they communicate. In which tool they're using, it's a different thing. Yeah. So these are, I would say, our technical improvements which we are doing. And again, technical availability is everything. If you can increase this, then you automatically increase your cash flow. But again, we are always open to hear and to look into all these concepts and ideas which we hear on conferences, on webinars, and then we try it. Bifacial is, for me, a super interesting topic. I would say this is not so much how you can improve your existing assets. I think this is more interesting in using when you plan your new sites. And we did a few tests now so that we use our standardized structure, 20 degrees, quite low road distance, and we put bifacial on it, and we didn't change anything. So we didn't put whatever white rocks or stones, or we didn't put paint on the sand. So we accepted the albedo, which it is on the normal existing plants in Germany. and it's super interesting. So you really can have, without any changes, only changing the module and not design changes and not electrical design changes, you have an increase of, I would say, 3, 4, 5%. Yeah. So, and if for sure the module manufacturers wanted to sell the bifacial modules as a premium, but if you can balance this, then it can be very interesting. So Enerpark is moving completely into bifacial, but using our normal racking system. So we don't change anything. And this, for me, is also an interesting development right now. So we've seen bifacial 20 years ago, the first time. And now I think it's moving and it's coming in the right direction. And as an investor, we are looking forward to have so performance increase on new plans with the same amount of structure is always great.
Okay, so with the bifacial, Stefan, I mean, you obviously mentioned it there. So are you looking to roll out bifacial PV panels and modules throughout your new developments?
Correct. So I think in Germany, as you probably know, when you are in the EEG, in the feed-in tariff, you cannot change the module only because you have a higher performance. They are already registered with the serial numbers. But for all the new exit plans which we are developing and building, which we won in the auctions, we will use at least, I'm pretty sure, 1/3 of the megawatts which we are doing next year will be bifacial. For sure, we will be a bit selective and try to check if the albedo is good. Yeah. We have to develop now our own way how we can analyze this. But out of our, I don't know, 500 megawatt next year, I'm pretty sure we will do 100 megawatt bifacial on existing normal standard installation on ground mount.
Okay. So yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the sort of performance improvements that you were hoping for and noticing from these bifacial modules. It ties into the question I was going to ask Robin, which was you obviously get a lot of these reports, and you mentioned with Opton you're outsourcing a lot of your operations. So how do you make sure that technical reports from different service providers are comparable?
That's indeed a difficult one. I would like to first add one thing on the bifacial discussion. I fully agree with Stefan on that normally the business case works quite easily. So the premium on the bifacial modules is easily gained back by the performance increase, and you don't need any special racking system and so on. Where we see challenges with bifacial modules is that especially in countries where the sort of technical calculations are more strict and are more checked and need more signatures than in other countries, that sometimes it's a bit difficult still to exactly determine what technical parameters should be used for these bifacial modules. And what I'm trying to say here is that obviously you get an increase versus the nominal values of the module, which is typically based just on one side of the module, but where we, for example, had some interesting discussions with inverter manufacturers in sort of determining the worst case scenario, was what exactly do you then take? Do you really need to go 25% in terms of current, for example, above the monofacial values, or that is at least our take, is that the bifacial effect more comes into play when the irradiation is not direct and ideal from the highest point of the sun. So that's some things where it's still a bit difficult at some points how to treat these modules. But coming back to your question on how to sort of compare apples and apples, and that's indeed difficult, because I think there is as many definitions of performance ratio around as there is contracts, and the same for availability, and the same for many other parameters that are usually taken to sort of qualify the performance of PV plants. And here our approach is, which we are trying to slowly implement as much as possible, is to go back to the raw data. So if we really compare kilowatt hours per square meter in irradiation and compare kilowatt hours that come out of a plant, that's something that luckily is the same in Australia as in Europe as in the United States. So a kilowatt hour is a kilowatt hour everywhere in the world. And then based on this information and based on our own criteria of excluded events, or however they are called in the various contracts, we can then make the performance of different plants at least somehow comparable. So really going to numbers that are reported by O&M providers in different parts of the world is something that at least should be treated with a big caution here.
Okay, so you know, to ask you on that, you mentioned to be treated in caution. What does that specifically entail, Robin?
That specifically entails that you always have to look at how the various parameters are defined. And I just recently had here in Denmark 25 controllers of the individual plants around me asking questions, and it turned out that they get for actually the similar raw data, they get completely different values of the performance ratio depending on whether they take the monitoring data, whether they take the O&M reported data, or whether they do the calculation based on the raw data themselves. And then that's what I say when I say treat it with caution. Make sure you understand where the numbers come from and what is the underlying sort of algorithms or the underlying contract that a derived number is based on.
Sure.
I have to say we see the same thing as what Robin's just said there. So the only data you can generally be reliant on is the raw data which comes through. So meter data for production, and pyronometer data for irradiation.
And Mike, then, do fill us in then, you know, with your experience in O&M and technical reports, do you work with other service providers to make sure that they're a bit more standardized, or, you know, what's your kind of work on technical reports of O&M performance?
We have fed into Solar Power Europe's work, and they're moving towards a standardization there. I haven't been involved so much on that myself. But I think that a level of standardization, you know, would be really good. I certainly agree with the perspective that performance ratio has multiple different ways of being calculated, but availability is really, you know, can be calculated in you know, very varied ways. And central inverter availability versus string availability may have no similarities whatsoever. What we typically do, or what we're generally asked to do by owners and investors, is to review contractual availability and performance ratio, which we'll do, you know, in accordance with the contract, with the input from the operator of the sites, and then we will also quite often give our own opinion according to the Everose standard for performance. As a way of sort of benchmarking that against you know, the potential of a plant and where it really sits, and because in a lot of cases, you know, there are a lot of excusable events which are used sometimes correctly, sometimes incorrectly, in operation and maintenance calculations.
Stefan, do you have anything to add on that?
I think we are in a lucky situation that 90% of our plants belong to us. So that means we don't have to discuss with, I'm trying a bit straight and direct. I mean, we all know we have a lot of investors outside who don't know what is PR. And if you then have to prepare whatever, a 3 pages report, and you know they do not understand half of it, this is always a challenge for our O&M guys. So that's the reason why we are generally happy to concentrate really on our own reporting. And to be honest, our own reporting is super simple. Every day a short information about the cash flow and not about PR or about other things. So we only care about the cash flow. And this is finally the yield. For sure, our O&M guys have to go much deeper and they have to analyze if everything is in line with our projection. But for me as an investor, I always want to see what is the cash flow today, what is the cash flow till end of the month, and what is the projected cash flow till end of the year. And this is for me the interesting number.
Okay, interesting. Could you expand on that? So why specifically cash flow is the most integral measurement?
Naja, I think if you are a simple investor, you are doing a PV power plant for sure to save the world a bit, yeah. But at the end, you do it because you want to make money, and money means cash flow, and cash flow means yield, yeah. So can you do any projection if the yield on this day is low or high? Not really, but can you do it on a monthly forecast or on the quarterly forecast or the annual forecast to check if the plant is performing well or not so well? Yeah, you can. But this is what we call our internal report. So, and at the end, the bank is also completely happy about this because for them, also the cash flow counts. That's it. Yeah? So they believe us that it's our investment, our money, and if the cash flow is in line with the forecast, then everything is good. Yeah? Again, all the O&M guys in the team, for sure, they have to look much deeper into it. Yeah. So we have also a list of best performers or low performers, and we are working on it to find out where the issues are. But for me as an investor with more than 250 plants, total cash flow is super interesting for me and the main topic in the beginning.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, Robin, obviously, Opton are investors. Is that a key metric for them for analyzing their plants?
Well, of course, what counts in the end is the money. Yeah, that's of course true. But then cash flow itself or cash flow alone might still, depending on the jurisdictions, be a bit misleading. For example, in Italy, cash flows are not necessarily aligned time-wise exactly with the production of the plants, where you just get some prepayments sort of for 12 months and then everything is rolled up. So you at least for me as an engineer, by heart, it's also important to really go back to the actual kilowatt hours, and the cash flow or the revenue and later on the cash flow is then determined by a couple of other parameters that you might or might not be able to influence. But the actual first value to look at is the kilowatt hours.
Perfect. I mean, well, a key point also that I wanted to bring into the discussion and topic that is definitely it's been spoken about in a lot of these webinars and conferences is the topic of repowering. I wanted to ask Mike about that first. I mean, how big a role do you foresee for inverter repowering in the future, and what are the kind of risks and difficulties you see associated with this?
So inverter repowering is becoming more prevalent. There's no doubt. I think it's probably worthwhile talking separately around string inverters and central inverters. So I think I'll concentrate on central inverters with regards to repowering. Most of what we see in the UK at the moment is repowering either because of catastrophic failure, so inverter fire or complete destruction of the inverter, and either an insolvent supplier or a supplier who no longer provides that specific inverter. So we're seeing quite a lot of those being replaced now. You also, of course, can repower with a similar product, but we're seeing quite a lot of people changing the inverters supplied now. There's some repowering to increase the efficiencies of the plant, but in general, again, I would say that's normally because the original inverters supplied have been withdrawn from the market. So it's very difficult to get spare parts, or they're very hard to look after, or they're becoming very unreliable. I'd be really interested actually in the co-panelists with regards to what they think from more mature markets where they've had solar installed for a longer period of time. But that's what we're seeing in the UK in general. And it's becoming, it's becoming more common. It's expensive generally to, to repower central inverters. So what we're seeing in some locations is you might repower 1 or 2 central inverter stations with a newer inverter, and then cannibalize the old parts for spares and for use rather than repowering an entire plant. I've heard, but I haven't seen it myself, that there are a couple of plants where they've repowered the entire plant and then moving those parts to other plants. In terms of the risks and the difficulties, I suppose that breaks down into 3. There's the technical difficulties and risks. So first of all, you need to be compatible. So that can be size, that can be cable size, the actual site infrastructure, and then technically the DC and AC voltage need to work, and particularly AC voltage can be troublesome on inverters if you don't want to change the transformers at the same time. So there's quite a lot of specification work needs to go in. I think people also somewhat forget there's some regulatory requirements. So depending on the jurisdiction, you may need planning permission. If you're building another building outside of an existing one, that could require changes in planning permission, and that can take time to put into place. And then also on regulatory, you've got grid connection issues. So I suppose the simple ones, is it the same in-feed, so same power in-feed to the grid as before? If it's not, have you got a power limitation device installed? And does the grid operator accept that power limitation device? I think there's also issues arising where the district network operators or the network operators have tightened up their requirements. So a plant may have been installed originally, and when you change the inverter and let the network operator know, they may come back with, have you done this study, like a harmonic study, which may never have been done before. And that can cause interesting problems, let's say, because the harmonics issues may have always been there, may not be a function of what you've replaced the equipment with. And then I think in certain jurisdictions, you've got to be pretty careful on subsidy regimes. So changes in efficiency, changes in the net capacity connecting to the grid, those could potentially affect subsidies in different regimes. And then last one, but a clearly important one of the big things to consider if replacing on central inverter is how long it's going to take and how much lost revenue that involves. If you need to do planning, build, source the equipment, install it, that can be a large amount of lost revenue. Sometimes that may be covered by insurance and business interruption. On other occasions, it's not.
Okay, so yeah, I bring Stephanie actually in there. Obviously, as someone who owns and operates the entire portfolio. What have you noticed with repowering? Is it something that you're active in, and do you have comments to add to Mike's excellent analysis there?
Yeah, I think Mike mentioned this already. I think we had in the last few years a lot of insolvencies in inverter companies. So we did also a few repowering activities, but I wouldn't call it repowering. I call it also whatever increasing the spare part level. Yeah, I think it is really always related to technical availability. So that means we changed 2-3 sites for string inverters with string inverters, and we increased our number of inverters for our spare parts management. So we were a bit forced to do it. Yeah, I think we have not seen now at the moment that the performance of the plant will increase if you do a repowering on, I would say, up to 10-year-old plants. But again, because of the insolvencies, it makes sense to do this from time to time.
Okay. So,
unfortunately,
Mike,
this is the case.
Yeah, I understand. So, Mike, do you know what kind of key improvements have you seen from any repowering case studies, if any?
So I would reflect what Stefan said there. So what you tend to see is an improvement in availability. You do potentially see some improvement on the efficiency of inverters, but that's normally hidden and very secondary to the simple fact that, if an inverter fails and requires a spare part and the original supplier is insolvent, it can take days or weeks to get a spare. If you've got a new product and it's well supported and you've got spares available, then your availability will be much higher. So that tends to be the big impact in terms of additional yield from repowering.
Okay, and Robin, do you have anything to add on that? Have you been involved in repowering yourself?
Well, as in my previous life as an advisor and technical service provider, we couldn't really understand why we saw so little repowering in the market. In my current life with an asset owner and asset manager, I do understand it much better, because the key challenge that we face is really the economics, and even though on paper these, and not only on paper, also in reality, such a repowering can actually pay off in 3 or 5 years, and that is certainly justified if you have feed-in tariffs running for another 12 or 13 years. It turns out that it is sometimes a bit difficult to raise the money from the fund owners or from the banks to sort of make this initial investment. I think the technical challenges are, of course, as the other panelists have mentioned, and you have to look at regulatory boundary conditions and so on. But if for example, an inverter manufacturer would come and say, we are actually financing this repowering, and you can just pay off your inverters over the next 5 years, your new inverters, that is, I think we would see much more of this repowering. And to the question, how much have I or have we seen? We have done it a few times, but only when we were forced to, either by insolvencies or by banks that said you have to replace the inverters. So completely on our own decision, we haven't done any repowering so far.
Interesting. Now, obviously, we could talk for a whole hour about repowering, and potentially that would be the next webinar. But I just want to jump into a couple of questions that the audience have been asking. Carlos before asked about drones. I wanted to open this question up actually to the panel, because there's a lot of talk about drones. Some commentators say that these are just widely used, but Stefan, with your portfolio, have you seen any real benefits from drones and aerial inspection use?
Yeah, I think the drone is not the holy grail, because a drone cannot replace the physical inspection. Yeah? So if you really want to find out what is underneath the module, if the cable ties are okay or not, the drone cannot really help you. But the drone can be a nice add-on. At the moment, I think there are a lot of companies who are outside who can make excellent flights. We see also that there is an interaction with the aerial analysis companies like Sidemark, Raycatch, you name it. So there is a strong interaction, which we also like. But for me is then the next question, and then. Yeah, so we are getting at the moment, as I mentioned before, a lot of data, and these data need to be digested in a professional way. It doesn't help me if the system gives me every morning an information that I have 3 diode failure on a 10 megawatt plant. Yeah? So this is not for me an additional add-on. Yeah? And this is what I believe our industry has to move a bit ahead and to talk to other industries and call it AI or call it machine learning or call it algorithm or whatever. But I think we need to find a way how we can analyze these data in a professional way, so that the O&M guys who run the show get the right advisors. And this is what at the moment I'm missing a little bit. I see something is coming, but at the moment, since I would say 1 or 2 years, we talk all about drones. But for me, it's not the final step reached till today.
Okay, Mike, and as someone who has been working a lot in O&M, both as the O&M provider and as an advisor, do you have anything else also to chip in then? Obviously, Stefan was talking about the data processing, and also I asked about the benefits of drones. What's your kind of thoughts on this topic?
I think they've got their place, without doubt. I think it's very useful to do periodic drone surveys to view how sites are moving, and you can. It's nice because it's a visual tool as well, or can be a visual tool. I think I'd agree to some extent with Stefan that there's as well as getting the pictures of what's happening, it's necessary to then get an understanding of what that actually means to the background of the drones. I think the other side actually also exists, where you've got some suppliers who do surveys, but they only show you the exceptional points and they don't show you everything. And in fact, it's useful to be able to have all pictures of a site in order to see if there is some form of degradation going on. I think the other side at the moment is that, unless it's very, very stable weather conditions, there's an awful lot of impact on what you see from a thermography, depending on the weather conditions when the surveys are done. So yes, they do change. I mean, they're very useful for things like diodes, faulty diodes, checking that strings are out. Sometimes you might be able to see that with an alternative route.
And Robin, anything else to pitch in on Mike and Stefan's comments?
Probably at this stage, not much to add. It has all been said. I mean, I remember our first attempts with drones is something like 7, 8 years, 9 years ago, where it took longer to set up the drone than it would have taken to just do all the things on the ground by itself. But and things have developed massively. But I think there is still, again, it's a bit also about standardization. So it would help if there were more clearer standards on when a failure is identified as a failure, because it seems to me a bit that every of these service providers have different rules and which makes things again less comparable.
Perfect. Now, there's a question that came in specifically for you, Stefan, but I can open this up also to the panel. When you do O&M internally, how do you deal with remote sites? Isn't there an argument that it would be more cost efficient to outsource O&M unless your sites are all clustered together? That was asked by Lara.
Yeah, I think the comment is right. No? So, I mean, we are in I would say, lucky situation that Germany is not so large and the infrastructure is good. So most of our sites are in Germany. That's the reason why we can do it. But I completely agree with you. So, for example, we also do in UK and in Spain now and in France. There we work with external guys. But we try to ensure always that, again, I always speak about this ownership. I have to, I don't need an maintenance guy who's running around with a list, with a tick box. I need people with a few cells in their brain who can really analyze things and who can see things and feel responsible. But I agree with you, we cannot do everything, and it's always a matter of the amount of sites which you have in one region. So, yeah.
I mean, obviously the question of in-house versus outsource operations probably comes about a lot more when growing a portfolio. So, Robin, with your experience and with Opton, when you are growing your portfolio, what are the first topics that you would suggest to in-house or in-source even?
Well, to answer that, I can refer back to a previous answer of Stefan, when it was more about standardization or comparability of data when you, Stefan, mentioned the most important thing in the end is the money and the cash flow and the liquidity. So when Opton, or where Opton starts insourcing, is really on the money side. So starting from being our own directors of the SPVs and to sort of trying to do all the bookkeeping and management of the SPVs, and we have a couple of hundreds of those ourselves. And then all the handling of the lenders would be also something that is done in-house. And the further away in every respect it gets, the more we still and will always rely on outsourcing. And I would say the one and only thing, or one of the things that I would not for a company like Opton ever insource is when it really comes to the field force, to the people on site that do the technical operation and maintenance on a day-to-day basis. Yes, we are looking at having project managers that can sort of supervise and coordinate the work, and that can also be on site in the individual countries. Like I said before, local stakeholders need to be taken care of by local resources. But we are not going to hire 20, 40 or more electricians to do the day-to-day work. That's something that there is specialized companies for that, and we'll rely on those.
Okay, so another question's come in, and it was on future costs. And it ties into a question I was going to ask Mike too. So Mike, what are the most difficult risks to assess in an operational project or portfolio? And Paul, one of the webinar participants, is asking, how do you basically predict future costs?
So I'll try and take those in turn. I think probably the most difficult risks to assess in a portfolio are those which are actually the most difficult to cost. So typically, those are the ones where the outcome can vary between catastrophic or zero. So as an example, a site with flooding risk. So if it floods, that's catastrophic, and if it doesn't, there's nothing. So costing that's extremely difficult. Or much more common and viewed very regularly, poor substructure, either not assessed properly, not signed off, or with poor ground surveys and design work done. I think the other area which is very difficult as a TA to price is where you've got a distinct lack of documentation. So where the constructor may have gone bust before or after they've completed a project. Those are extremely difficult risks to assess, because you often don't have the information to hand. And I think in those views, that really comes down to experience. So, Everose, we've viewed a lot of plants over time, and nothing really counts in these situations like having experience. With regards to pricing going forward, we tend to price on a spare parts, so MRA basis, and a ongoing O&M basis is the typical way that we price forward. And that's also quite complicated, because a lot of equipment is relatively new, and if you take inverters, for example, the big suppliers of today, the likes of Huawei, weren't really around in sizable numbers 5 or 10 years ago. So yes, it's a case of forecasting forward costs a great deal on experience.
Probably I can add also to this, because I think we see more and more now the focus on quality. I mean, let's be clear, we are at the moment still in the, call it the 20 years FIT structure. System is written off in 20 years, up to PPA systems with a lifetime of 30, 35 years. Yeah? This means the expectation on quality, as Mike mentioned correctly, on the structure, for example, but also on simple insulation on cables which are buried in the ground, will increase dramatically, which I think is good. Yeah. So I think especially for TAs and for other auditors in the market, they probably will have enough to do in the next few years, because there is a change from 20 to 35 years or more.
And Robin, do you have anything to add to that as well? Specifically, what risks to assess in an operational project or portfolio?
No, I think here again, yeah, I think things have been said, so there is nothing to be added from our side in particular.
I think Stefan did make a really good point that an awful lot of the best work for long-term O&M happens in the construction phase, and good components, well installed, are much easier to look after. That's pretty obvious, but it's really true.
So a question's come in from Michael Butler, and this will be the probably one of the penultimate, or if not the last question. What has the experience been in Europe in regards to maintenance and failures, step-up transformers, and medium voltage equipment? So quite a technical question. Mike, do you have any? Would you be able to tackle that one?
It's not really my specialism. So medium to high voltage, there's not so much UK solar in that area. Most of the equipment we see is low to medium voltage, and transformers are some transformers are failing a lot more often than people would expect. There's again definitely a link between quality of the installed equipment and the number of failures. Not so sure on the MVHV side. I might need to duck that one to one of the other guys, or bring on one of our electrical specialists on the next webinar.
So, Stefan, could you be able to tackle that one at all? That question
I'm also not a medium voltage specialist, but what I know is very clearly, I think all the medium high voltage interconnections are part of the, I would say, critical infrastructure. So that means we have completely different inspection time zones. So that means if the system is directly connected even to a high voltage system, 110 kVA plus or something, kV plus, then automatically you have to inspect it on an annual basis. This means, and this is, for example, what we cannot do at the moment, because this is where you need really the high special MV, high V guys who are doing the review. So in general, I feel much more comfortable because this is a critical part of the infrastructure.
And Robin, anything else to add as well onto that?
Yes, well, actually, Stefan has made the point, and funny enough, actually, just today we had this discussion for our large project in Canada, that the fact that it is connected to high voltage makes it critical infrastructure, and makes it in every respect much more sensitive, let's say, to risk analysis and so on. Yeah.
Perfect. Right, well, actually, that almost wraps up now. So that's all we have time for today. If you want to continue these important discussions, if you want more examples and case study of what is actually happening in the solar O&M and asset management world, and how we're going to, transform digitally and improve reliability, among other things, then do make sure to get yourself to PV Operations Europe in Munich, March 5th to the 6th. Just search PV Operations Europe on your preferred search engine to find out more. A huge thank you, obviously, to Mike, Stefan, and Robin for taking part today. I'm sure you find that insight useful, stimulating, and certainly food for thought. You will have access to the full audio replay and slide 1 week from now. Please do share them with your colleagues, clients, and the broader solar community. The aim of this discussion is to act as a catalyst for operational change in the solar industry. So the wider we get these discussions, the more effective they will be. Okay, so thanks for tuning in, and good morning. And do let me know if you have any questions regarding the event. Bye.